So there's a lot of questions when it comes to the Biden economy, what's going on with jobs, the jobs available, unemployment. Where are the workers? Why aren't they going to work? A whole bunch of issues that we can dive into. So hopefully Mark Mix is someone that might be able to shed some light on a lot of this. And we're speaking now on the phone with Mark Mix. You are the president of the National Right to Work Committee, and also you're president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. So Happy New Year, Mark Mix. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today on the Talk of the Town.
Well, Rocco, it's good to be on with you. Thanks for the opportunity. You and Mark, I've been listening to your conversation about the Players Theater. That sounds like a problem that needs to be solved, but it's good to talk with you about the economy this morning and what's going on in the job world, and specifically, what is happening with the labor numbers and employment and those types of issues. So I look forward to it.
And just before we get into that, you've had some writings that appeared in national outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, Investors Business Daily, Washington Examiner, and the National Review. So there's a lot that we can unpack here, and you kind of know where our thinking is if you've been listening the past few minutes. What do you see as the biggest job story or aspect that you think the public should understand about what's really going on with the job market and the economy right now, as you would be concerned?
Yeah, well, Rocco and Mark, I think the most important element right now is I travel the country, and I'm out in Ohio right now and getting ready for a couple meetings this afternoon with some folks, some employers who are looking for people to work. I know that one of the things that's happened, no matter where you go, there is, hiring signs up, there's signing bonus signs up, there's all kinds of signs up for getting people to work. And, I know Mark had a philosophy, you mentioned it before the break, that Mark talked a little bit about the government benefits that were out there that were basically encouraging people not to go to work. And you could do well on unemployment benefits and other things that were coming through from the pandemic. And, some of that's still true, Rocco. There's still some of that money that's sloshing around out there. We've got, student loan freeze on repayments. Yep. We've got rent payments that are still frozen. So right now the need for, money and cash flow is a little bit limited because it's making it up. And when you pay people not to work, that's where you get the situation. I know Biden talks about an unemployment rate that's about 3.9% as we look at the last report that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But that belays really the reality of what's happening out here, and that is that, the cost of labor is going up, the productivity is going down a little bit, and there are lots of opportunities for people to work.
What's your thought on immigration and how that's impacted the labor market? Because we have heard, I hear periodically that immigrants had come in and they would fill a lot of these positions, and that if the immigration gates were open a little bit, that it would relieve some of this pressure, and actually the gross domestic product would increase because they don't have enough people to work right now. What's your thought on immigration?
Yeah, Mark. Well, look, legal immigration is one thing. The immigration that is occurring at the southern border is totally a different thing, I think. And the fact that it's done legally, and the fact that we have a process for allowing immigrants to come to the United States to start working here with their green card or their visa, and going through that process in an orderly manner makes a real difference. But if what happens is we have illegal immigration, we have this flood at the border, and these people are taking jobs at lower cost, not paying taxes, they're taking cash jobs, that hurts the American worker to a large degree. And, it's kind of interesting when you think about the immigration issue, Mark, that you think about the labor union position, and really kind of that's the focus of our work at National Right to Work. We believe that workers should have the right to join unions, and that right should be protected, but no one should be forced. And New York State is one of those states where workers can lose their jobs if they don't pay union dues or fees. I grew up there. My stepfather was a union member, machinist union member at a company over in Western New York. He was a welder. So I'm kind of familiar with the New York economy. But the immigration issue is an important one, and we have, as all these politicians love to say, we're a nation of immigrants, but we're a nation of legal immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants who come and work through their process and get their citizenship and do things right, as opposed to this surge that we're having at the border. And it goes in and out of the news very often. Sometimes they just forget about it. It seems like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden don't want to talk about it. But that has an impact when it comes to, displacing American workers and having the opportunity to find work. But right now, Mark, there is no lack of jobs out there for anyone who wants to work.
Right.
Obviously the quality of the job means something, but there are jobs available to everybody right now, whether you're an immigrant or a citizen.
So let me ask you this. This is interesting. So when you're talking about the right to work, is it your position that a person should have the right to join a labor union but should not be compelled to join a labor union? Is that basically the thrust of your organization?
That's exactly right, Mark. And 27 states across the country have passed what are known as right-to-work laws, and they basically say one thing. They say, look, you cannot be fired for failure to pay union dues or fees. In New York State, I mean, we represent clients all the time from New York who have basically, have this Hobson's choice to support a political agenda they disagree with, to support candidates or ideas they disagree with, and they have to pay money to a private organization, a labor union, in order to work. And so our mission has been, we're interested in employment, we're interested in helping people find work, but we're also opposed to government intervention when it comes to forcing someone to support a labor union just for the privilege of working in America.
I don't know if you caught this. You probably did, but I noticed in Maine they were going to have a law that allowed the agricultural workers to form unions, and the governor just vetoed it. She said no, because right now there's too much pressure on these small agricultural organizations in Maine, which is, I didn't realize Maine was one of the primary aspects of their economy was agriculture, and they said we can't put any more pressure, financial pressure, on the back of these companies that are having a hard time just surviving, and so she vetoed that, even though the legislature had passed it. Did you see that, and what's your thought about it?
Yeah, I didn't see that specifically, Mark. But what I do know is we have several different types of labor law in the country. We have public sector labor law in New York State. It's the Taylor Law kind of guides public employment in the state of New York. You have National Labor Relations Act, which was passed in 1935 by Franklin Roosevelt back then during the Great Depression, and the federal government dramatically expanded its power over private sector workers with the passage of the National Labor Relations Act. It was called the Wagner Act back then in 1935. And then we have an agricultural labor law that basically is state-directed. And there are several states that have passed labor policy for agricultural workers that mirrors the National Labor Relations Act that covers private sector workers. But in Maine, what's happening there in other states is that you have these unions and that go in and demand access to a farm or a large company farm or a dairy farm, and they control the workforce, and it really is something that generally hinders the work of agricultural businesses and workers there. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Court had a case, I believe it was last year, in the start of the term, that talked about union access to farms out in California. I mean, the unions had gotten a law passed that said they could go on to a farm 3 hours every day and talk to workers and talk to them about unionization. And any union that wanted to do that could do that. So you had a situation where unions could come on to a work site for 3 hours, and another one could come on for 3 hours, and another one could come on for 3 hours organizing workers. And certainly, if workers want to join together voluntarily and amplify their voice, there are plenty of laws, both in New York State and across the country, that protect a worker's right to join and organize a union. And that's the point. But when union officials want compulsion, when they want to force you to join, even if you voted no, even if you didn't want the union, that's where they run into a violation of what we believe is a fundamental right, and that is the right to work.
Very interesting on that regard. And when you go back to, you mentioned that you're in Cincinnati, I believe, in Ohio, and you're talking to employers that can't find people that are willing to work. And I know you mentioned that there's still funds slushing around out there in terms of eviction moratoriums and a freeze on paying tuition back or student loans. And you might have heard me mention this story that was on 60 Minutes if you saw yourself. What other factor is really going on that is kind of holding people back from going back to the workforce? Assume there's some out there that aren't on benefits anymore, because I can't believe it applies to all of them. They just aren't returning to the workforce. And you saw some part of the narrative in 60 Minutes is that during the pandemic, this time of staying home, they've reevaluated a lot of aspects of their lives and their work satisfaction. And any employer that doesn't take into consideration that employees aren't going to put up with some of the crap that they might have put up with for years anymore, that if those employees don't adjust it, they're not going to get the workers back. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and Mark did a great job of kind of fleshing that out, talking about the change in attitude, the change in a culture when it comes to, I'm getting, well, I won't tell you how old I am. Suffice to say I'm old enough to know. But, back when I was a young kid, it was, you get a job, you go to work, and you take it, and and now I think that culture has changed. I mean, I have 6 children. I have 4 of them that are in the work world. One of them works from home all the time now. They haven't been back to work for 2 years, and they sit at home with a desk with a computer. I have another one who just took a job down in Nashville, Tennessee, and enjoys the work, and the work environment there fits the kind of attitudes that you and Mark talked about, and that is, look, employers have to be super sensitive to the demands of employees and creating a culture that, that is encouraging to these people. They think of different things. And I think Mark mentioned it well. People, they want to spend more time at home. They're not interested in taking overtime. That's kind of change in the culture, and employers, and that, this is the one thing that kind of frustrates me, is that everyone thinks, they point to the employer and say, these are the bad employers. Mm-hmm. But an employer, in order to operate a business successfully and risk capital and make a profit, they have to take care of their employees. And so there's a natural kind of fix to all of this when an employer says, hey, I got to find somebody to work here if I'm going to continue to do what I do.
And now if you look at that, and part of that I could say that maybe in today's generation, today's era, there are a lot of people that are spoiled brats out there that they just don't realize, a job isn't meant to be playtime. It's you go to work, it's the fun you do after with the hard earnings that you get there to find a job that hopefully satisfies you. But it's a lot of people, I think, accept that their job isn't going to be the highlight of their day, so they kind of make the balance there. So I can understand to the degree there's some workers, employees now that have reevaluated what they're willing to tolerate. On the other side, is there a limit to what employers might say when they look at this and say, okay, but I still have productivity. I still have the bottom line to make. I can't cater to every single thing that these perhaps spoiled employees might want, and they need to accept that. What am I supposed to do? Are employers kind of in the dark as far as how much can I really give up to try to appease these people that I want to work for me?
And before you answer that, let me throw this in as far as what Rocco just said. I've also heard in there are companies, in particular in the Silicon Valley, where the workers come to work and they encourage them to play. They encourage them to engage in recreational activities while they're at work, and they have free cafeterias for people, and they're making it a fun experience. And they say that by doing that, we are increasing productivity because they're becoming more creative, and they are willing to come to work, and they like coming to work. Like Rock said, it's not the high point of their day, but in some of these companies, the newer companies with newer CEOs, they're making it a fun experience, and they want to go to work. Are you seeing that? How can you reconcile those?
Well, I think when you reconcile them, you think about what an employer has to do to attract talent, to attract people to work, and I think Rocco touched on that a little bit too. It's the American experience, the American experiment in individual rights and individual freedom provides an opportunity for workers to succeed. I mean, I know that sounds, kind of billboardish, but the bottom line is this. I mean, people work hard, and when I was growing up, I worked in a ceramic plant on the midnight to 8 shift, and I worked at a 2-aisle grocery store when the drinking age was 18. So I'm kind of dating myself now, Mark and Rocco, but in a college town, and you just do that, and hopefully at some point you find a balance of work and lifestyle that works for you, and these stories that come out I won't say that they're the exception to the rule, but there are lots of opportunities for people. And there's ways to basically grow yourself and find something you like to do. I mean, you may not love it, but you may like it. And I think that's the story of most Americans. And, you work hard and you can succeed. And, I grew up in the poorest county in New York State, in Allegheny County, and we have more dairy cows than people. And there's opportunities. I understand that. My brothers understood that. My children understand it, although Rocco, you might have met my two youngest spoiled children. You sounded like you were talking directly to them, so I'll have to play this for them. So thank you for that. But
if workers want to say, hey, I don't want to work a job unless I can wear my sweatpants all day long, I'm sorry. Well, to me, that's probably spoiled, right?
Well, I think there are certain protocols, and those issues.
I hated having to tuck my shirt in when I worked every day, for crying out loud.
Go to work at Facebook and dress like Zuckerberg, wear a T-shirt.
Now I'm on the radio, and I could show up in tank tops and swim trunks if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But to the point, just to wrap up that point that we were all kind of just alluding to. Is there a limit to what employees should really be demanded by the workers to how much they can give? I mean, maybe they can have like an omelet bar at their place, or bring in a ping pong table for people to have a leisurely break. But at the end of the day, if your employers are playing ping pong all day, then you're probably not getting the job done.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a fine line between some of that stuff, and having visited some places of employment where they went down that road, where they had video games and ping pong tables. You mentioned there's one particular company that I visited that was exactly like that, a ping pong table, and finally they said, we need to focus on work. And, I think the Department of Labor, the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, reported the third quarter of last year, productivity was down 5.2%. And, when you think about wages and the reality of kind of the economics, wages can only rise if productivity rises,
right.
In the sense, unless you have inflation. And that's what we're seeing right now, Mark and Rocco. We're seeing a tremendous increase in that kind of wage price spiral inflation that we talked about in macroeconomics way back when.
So hang on to that point. That's a good new topic to get into. We'll take a quick break here. When we get back, we can dive into maybe inflation and what impact that's having on wage increases, because I think some people, at least the media is saying that wages are going up, but it's not going up at the same rate of inflation. So even if those wages are going up because of competition and demand at this point, are they going to stay there, or are things going to ultimately stabilize and go back down? So Mark Mix with the National, I got that right, the National Right to Work Committee. Stay on the line. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll wrap up the conversation here on the Talk of the Town. All right. I love the guitar and drums there, Mark. I think that's a little Metallica, I believe. But all right, we're going to get back to, we have about 7 minutes or so here with Mark Mix, the president of the National Right to Work Committee. Very interesting conversation here about the state of jobs in the United States right now under the Biden economy. And before we went to the break, Mark, I wanted to raise the issue that you had touched upon here in terms of wages and inflation. So let me just make a few points and you could respond to it. One, are wages definitely going up, and are they going up enough? And what is driving those wages up? Is it competition? Is it productivity? And is that sustainable to keep the wages where they are right now if the economy starts to turn in a different way?
Yeah, well, if I knew the answers to all those questions, Rocco, that I could be the Federal Reserve Chairman or something like that. But I'm not, and so what we have to do is just kind of look at things that are happening. I mean, the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates there's about 11 million jobs open right now, and the Biden administration talks about an unemployment rate of 3.9% in December. There's a mismatch there. I mean, the idea that there are, I think, we're underfilling jobs by something like 5 or 6 million, the people available, the jobs available. So that does put pressure on wages. In order to attract someone to come work, you have to pay more, and that we're seeing that across the country. And government's got a hand in that as well. The increase in the minimum wage now, where you have, we're getting to a point where the fight for 15 is a reality. It's a government mandate now in many places where the minimum wage has gone up. And when you raise the minimum wage for entry-level positions, you create a new floor, and you have to create, kind of the same space for more senior employees that have been there, that you have to raise their wages too. So you have this kind of wage push, if you will. And the bottom line from what we understand statistically, the inflation rate is growing faster than the wage rate. So notwithstanding the fact that you're getting paid more, you're getting farther behind, because if you look at the inflation as it's being reported, I think we're going to be at something like between 6 and 8% inflation for the year. According to some of the studies I've looked at, I don't think there's any definitive number out there. The so-called Consumer Price Index changes and the hedonics that go into that, where, look, if steak costs too much, they use hamburger instead, or if houses cost too much, they use rents instead, and so they create this kind of subdued CPI number. But the bottom line, from what I'm seeing, and I think what the data shows, is that the cost of living is increasing faster than wages. So that pressure is going to have to give at some point. And what you see, like in the service industry, Rocco, I think you're seeing some automation that's going on. You're finding, some of these quick service restaurants finding ways to fill the holes that they can't fill with employees. And then the increased cost by going to these push button boards or whatever you call them when you go in and order a hamburger. You're seeing more and more of that, unfortunately, and that will change the work environment for sure. So
at some point, just one more point on that, Mark, as far as now that the wages have gone up to where they are, although it might not be on speed with inflation, assume at some point inflation slows down. Is there going to be then a driving force or a wake-up call that is going to put pressure to bring the wages back to a more reasonable level? Meaning downward, right?
Yeah, wages tend not to go down. I mean, I guess they can, but they tend not to. I think so. Generally, I would say no to that. You have this increased floor, and they generally tend not to go down unless there's a real, people say, look, I must have a job. I've got to have a job. And then it becomes a seller's market as opposed to a buyer's market.
I see the inflation pressure just getting worse because you have all these unfilled jobs, so employers have to pay more to attract workers. You've got the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. The 10-year Treasury note, 1.7% this morning. And that means auto loans are going to go up. You're going to be paying more. Mortgage loans are going to go up in price. So people are going to be paying more for the car. The cars are at record levels to begin with, used cars. And now if you're going to buy a car, you're going to have to pay more for the payment will be more because interest rates are more. And so the effort of the Federal Reserve to try to curtail inflation by raising interest rates is just going to add to the cost of cars and homes. I just see the inflation getting worse, and their wages aren't going to keep up with it. I don't see inflation. I don't see in the horizon where it's going to drop, especially when you got an administration that's trying its best to engage in more deficit spending, which is clearly inflationary.
Absolutely, Mark. I mean, that's basic stuff, and you're getting it right. And if interest rates go up, the debt service that most people are carrying is going to be a real burden, including the debt service of the United States federal government, which, to your point, is pumping these dollars into the economy, and that is inflationary by its very nature. By definition, that's inflationary. And the more money you have chasing fewer goods, the higher prices you get. And in order to slow it down, we know from the Reagan years, when Reagan hired Paul Volcker to be the chairman of the Federal Reserve and they raised interest rates, we got to 15 to 17, 18%, I think, back then, 81, 82. That was the only way to slow the inflation that existed, that had come into the marketplace, in the 70s. And that would be devastating when you think about, to your point, the debt service on car loans and home mortgages and those types of things that right now are fairly easy to manage when you have a home loan at 3% or 350 basis points. You start talking about borrowing at 7%, it changes the whole dynamic. And so, Mark, you're right. There's a real problem on the horizon. Not sure when it comes due, but it's coming due.
All right, Mark Mix, President of the National Right to Work Committee, with a fascinating conversation. We'll be posting this online shortly. You got 5 seconds here. Do unions want to see President Trump run for president again or not?
Union rank-and-file workers do. Union officials do not. There's a big difference.
There you go.
Mark, Happy New Year.
Yes.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for the call. Happy New Year to you, too, as well.
Thanks, Rocco. Thanks, Mark.
All right, and hopefully we'll talk again here. Mark Mix, President of the National Right to Work Committee, and a very interesting conversation about the Biden economy and jobs and wages and inflation. And we'll just continue this discussion in the year ahead, I'm sure, here on the Talk of the Town, Talk 100.7 FM.